The survival of a 21st-century nation-state is a function of physical momentum. It relies on the continuous, massive flow of energy and water through corridors that are increasingly vulnerable to interdiction. Across Asia in the mid-2020s, the security posture of billions of people is dictated by two specific geographic bottlenecks. The first is the Indus River Basin, which controls the flow of agricultural freshwater across South Asia. The second is the Strait of Malacca, which controls the flow of energy and trade into East Asia. As climate change accelerates and energy demands peak, economic workarounds are reaching their limits. Nuclear-armed states are now moving to explicitly weaponize their control over these two geographic choke points. This topographical map details the core allocation of the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. It reserves the eastern rivers for India at 20% capacity, while allocating the western rivers to Pakistan at 80%. While Pakistan receives the vast majority of the water, India controls the upstream headworks. 40% of the basin's catchment area sits strictly within Indian borders at a higher elevation, granting New Delhi physical leverage over the flow. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru signed this agreement for India. President Ayub Khan signed for Pakistan, establishing a functional Cold War-era compromise. The IWT's underlying flaw was its reliance on historical hydrological averages. As the climate warms, those predictable flows are shattering into erratic spikes of flooding and severe drops of drought. In the Hindu Kush Himalayas, glaciers are melting at a rate of 0.6 meters per year, projecting 50% seasonal water deficits during critical agricultural periods. Ice loss is accelerating rapidly at the source, destabilizing the entire basin's hydrology. In April 2025, following a deadly militant attack in Pahalgam, India suspended its obligations under the IWT entirely. This suspension marks a shift to unilateral geographic weaponization. India is bypassing international mechanisms like the PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is an intergovernmental organization based in The Hague that resolves disputes between states. Because Pakistan relies on the Indus for 90% of its agriculture and possesses only 14.4 million acre-feet of storage capacity, upstream flow reduction by India creates an immediate economic catastrophe. On the Tibetan Plateau, China sits as the ultimate upstream riparian power. Beijing maintains regulatory infrastructure over the headwaters of the Indus, controlling about 10% of its flow, as well as the Brahmaputra River, which feeds directly into India. China's regional influence is anchored by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. CPEC is a multi-billion-dollar strategic bypass connecting Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea. CPEC investments subsidize Pakistan's domestic water storage and hydropower projects, specifically fortifying Islamabad against India's upstream leverage. Facilities like the Tarbela Dam illustrate the massive scale of infrastructure required to maintain this regional balance of power. Securing these high-altitude infrastructure corridors demands intense militarization, with convoys constantly navigating steep and hostile terrain. India's suspension of the IWT carries a severe proxy risk. It provides Beijing with a strategic justification to retaliate by damming or diverting the Brahmaputra River. Because the Brahmaputra supplies 30% of India's total freshwater, an escalation turns basic hydrology into a primary vector for nuclear state deterrence. Moving to the Indian Ocean, China faces a geographic trap of its own. In 2003, Beijing officially identified this vulnerability as the Malacca dilemma. The Strait of Malacca forces an immense volume of global shipping into a severely constricted physical passage, creating intense congestion. This map tracks China's energy imports. Approximately 80% of its $390 billion energy supply funnels through this single maritime bottleneck. The closest alternative, the Sunda Strait, drops below 25 meters deep, physically blocking supertankers exceeding 100,000 deadweight tonnage. Deeper alternatives, like the Lombok Strait, add nearly 3,000 kilometers and 4.5 days to every shipment. Even with these costly detours, all alternative straits remain highly vulnerable to interdiction by the United States and its allied navies. China attempted to bypass the ocean entirely by building overland pipeline routes, heavily funding terminal nodes like the Gwadar port in Pakistan. Yet these overland routes are severely bottlenecked by the physical reality of the Karakoram mountain range, low road capacity, and regional insurgencies. Geographic reality has defeated China's economic workarounds. The world's second-largest economy remains permanently exposed to foreign naval dominance at a single choke point. This data dashboard compares two immense, looming crises. On the left, India's projected freshwater demand hitting 1,500 BCM. BCM measures large-scale water volume. On the right, China's 80% reliance on the Strait of Malacca for its energy survival. India's severe water stress drives its aggressive upstream posture on the Indus River, prioritizing national resource security over legacy treaties. China's response to the Malacca trap is visible in its aggressive naval expansion into the Indian Ocean via new military bases in Djibouti and Gwadar. Static legal frameworks like the IWT are essentially obsolete in a warming climate. They lack the built-in flexibility to manage today's extreme environmental volatility. When these rigid systems break down, the cost is measured in submerged infrastructure, devastated agricultural sectors, and millions of displaced citizens. Traditional norms of maritime security are proving equally insufficient to manage the friction of a multipolar race for raw materials. Dominance in this century belongs to the powers that can physically secure and adaptively govern these unchangeable geographic choke points.